Well, good evening, everyone. Let's call the joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the Winooski Housing Commission to order on September 24th at, let's call it 6:06. So thanks everybody for coming. This meeting will be recorded, correct?
I'm like really bad.
You're good.
Recording in progress.
Oh wait, okay, yeah.
Good, all right. Thanks everybody. Well, my name is Sean Gilpin. I am coming up on my 2-year anniversary of Winooski residency down Elm Street, so happy to be here, and I've been involved with the Housing Commission for a little bit and was just recently chosen to be, or pushed to be the chair of the Housing Commission, so and asked to facilitate this meeting. So thank you all for being here. It would be definitely super helpful for me, and I think perhaps some others, to do a quick round of introductions, and then we can get into the agenda items. So if I could look over to my right.
Yeah, I can start. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Blything. I live on Russell Street and have been a resident for 9 years. I'm sitting on the Planning Commission, and yeah, turn it over to Sarah.
I'm Sarah Van Reckenborstel, and I live on Winooski Falls Way, and I think I've lived in Winooski for 15 plus years now, and been on the Planning Commission for 6, I believe. So.
Hi everyone, Brendan Sage. I've been in Winooski since 2021, first living downtown and then on the Fountain Street for the last 2+ years. And I've been on the Planning Commission just about since I moved to Winooski, so I think I'm my 3rd or 4th year now.
I'm sorry, was that Brendan or Brandon?
Brendan.
Brendan, okay.
Do you want to go right?
Sure. I'm Ravi. I'm the director of city planning, and I live in South Burlington.
How long have you been here?
It's okay.
Yeah.
Couple of weeks.
I'm Jasmine. I am the city's housing initiative director, and I live in Burlington.
I'm Robert Millar. I'm a member of the Housing Commission. Lived in Winooski about 15 years. I was previously chair on the Housing Commission. Been on basically since it started about 7 years ago. Also chair of the school board. Among other things.
Perennial volunteer.
Yeah.
I'm John Baker. I'm fairly new to Winooski and fairly new to the Planning Commission, so kind of getting up to speed.
My name is Patrice Lumumba, and I'm the wellness coordinator at the Winooski School District, and this is my 3rd year there, so I'm also new to the commissioners.
I'm Jack Como. I'm the vice chair of the Housing Commission. Lived in Winooski since 2017.
Great, and let's throw it to online to any commission members or other public servants, public volunteers. Anyone can jump in. I'm having trouble seeing the names on
I think
the.
that's Ruth.
Okay.
Steinmetz. I am a member of the Inclusion and Belonging Commission assigned to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Actually, could you repeat your first name? I didn't catch it.
Ruth Steinmetz.
Great, thank you, Ruth.
I am Thomas Renner. I'm your deputy mayor. Usually I am on the downtown Winooski and Safe, Healthy, Connected People commissions, overseeing their meetings. But the mayor and Councilor Judge were both unavailable tonight, so you've got me instead.
Well, thank you for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Lily, and I am the person from the Inclusion and Belonging Committee. And I've lived in Winooski a little over 2 years.
Keep it going online.
You want me to jump in?
Please.
Mike O'Brien, I'm sorry I'm late. I was in another meeting, but I'm currently the chair of the Planning Commission. Yeah, thank you.
And my name is Anna Wagling, and I am one of the Housing Commission commissioners. Thank you.
Great. I think that's everybody. Thank you all.
I think Connor.
Oh.
Sorry, I know
Oh,
you
yeah,
can't see
yeah.
But I can't see them. Okay, yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, hi, folks. Can you hear me okay?
We
I'm
can.
in transit. Great. Yeah, Connor Daly, Planning Commission alternate. I think I've been on Planning Commission for 2 years, been in Winooski for three and a half, 4. Also serve as chair of the board of the Chittenden Housing Corporation, and I'm the airport commissioner for the city of Winooski.
Very good. Is that everybody?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all for spending an evening to better our communities here. So we have on the agenda public comment, meeting minute approval. I think a bulk of our work will be on reviewing inclusionary housing requirements, and then a discussion on the developer roundtable. Before we jump into public comment, was there anything else that commissioners wanted to add to the agenda?
No, but we do have to approve the previous minutes.
We will do, yes, yeah, gotcha. All right, hearing none. Previous meeting minutes, and that was from
That's the last combined meeting. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So what was the date of the, it was June, right?
There's a May meeting, there's June.
Right.
Sorry.
It's okay. So
It was June.
I'm sure everybody had a chance to review them thoroughly before they arrived. Can I entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the June 25th joint meeting?
So moved. Mike O'Brien.
Mike O'Brien moves. Do I have a second? All right, we have a second for Robert. Is there any discussion before we vote? Anna's taking a shot. All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes from June meeting? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Sounds like the meeting minutes are therefore passed. Congratulations, we got one thing off the list tonight. So let's dive into discussion of review of section 517. I don't know if we're Jasmine or Ravi. Is it Ravi or Ravi? I want to be sure. Ravi.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, and congrats on the new role. I think this is the first time that it's relatively new.
Yeah, it's still relatively fresh, yeah.
So yeah, I'll kick it to you to table set for us, please.
Sure. I think to start off, it might be good just to walk through the regulations. Since the last time you saw them, Jasmine and I have looked at it pretty thoroughly and made a lot of edits to it. So Jasmine, if you want to throw it up on the screen.
Oh, and actually, you know what? I did not ask for the public comment period. Do we have anybody from the public online?
We do not.
We do not. Do we have anybody here who would like to make public comments as a member of the public and not in your official role? All right, hearing none, we will close the public comment period. Move on.
Okay. Yeah, so let's just start with the regulations just to go through it, and then we can go bit by bit, address any questions that you might have. The introduction, the intent, pretty much has remained the same since you last saw it. Very similar to the language from what you saw last time. Applicabilities also, actually the applicability has changed. In this draft, we have it at to any development that proposes 10 or more dwelling units. We've done a little bit of research on figuring out what other municipalities are doing and what are considered best practices. Best practices considered to be a threshold of 6 units, and that's when it works pretty well. Most municipalities that we've looked at have it at around 10 units typically. The lowest we saw was 5, but even with 5, it was still like between 5 and 10, offering 1 unit or an in-lieu fee. In our case, we thought that 10 would be the best workable number as a threshold, and it's in line with comparable municipalities. So we have exceptions here for educational institutions, senior housing, for projects that are all affordable. With the inclusionary unit requirements, that hasn't changed since last time. 15% for 65% AMI, 80% for 25% for 80% AMI and below. For sale units at 120% AMI, 25% required for sale. That's been that way. Yeah. The new addition here is this 3 or more bedrooms. We had conversations with CEDO in Burlington and with South Burlington on their regulations. One thing that stood out that they liked or they had was this credit for 3 or more bedrooms. That if a developer produces more or produces a 3-bedroom unit, then that would count as 1.5 affordable units. So then it pushes down that requirement to build the required amount of affordable units if they build more 3-bedroom affordable units. And that's something that's a priority to this community, to have more 3-bedroom units. The inclusionary housing standards, I think this has pretty much remained the same since the last time, with the same types of standards. We want the units to be integrated to any project. We want the units to be of comparable size to the market rate units. We want them to look the same on the interiors and the exteriors. We don't want to create any sort of visual discernment from the units based on the types.
Hey, Rebe?
Yes?
This is Mike. I'm sorry. I was looking at another document. Can you go back to the exemptions and you? Okay. But then you were talking about the 3 units, and I think that's under D, and I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is that the
So-
section you're looking at, Mike?
What's that?
D4, is that what you were looking at?
Yes.
I was looking at an old draft of this that we got in our packet, I think, that did include the 3 or more, didn't include the stuff 3 and 4 that I'm looking at right here. And are we going to discuss the percentage of units? You want to do that later?
Yeah, could you expand more on that? Do you mean the percentage of units required for affordable?
Right.
Or,
Right.
Yeah, so we can discuss this, unpack this a little bit. So with this, best practices is to have it at around 10% for inclusionary, at around 10 or 15%, and then having some sort of bonus requirement if you build more inclusionary units, and there's some sort of offset usually involved with building more inclusionary units and some sort of incentive of additional density. In the Winooski context, based on the rents on the rent rolls that we have, we felt that this level, this threshold, suited this context best. 15% for 65% AMI, 80%, or 25% for 80% AMI. I think, Jasmine, you can probably expand more on the rents, but with the 80% AMI, right now, the average rent that, based on our data, is at around 80% AMI. So we thought it reasonable that the least we could require developers at this point is to have 25% of the units be priced at 80% AMI for rentals, and then if they provide moderate or low income or lower income, then 15% of those units at 65% AMI would make sense in this context.
Just because essentially what the rental data from the landlord survey saw was that pretty much all of our median rents for all bedroom sizes were at 80 or slightly below sometimes. So having, for example, just 20%, 80% AMI, that's very easy for a developer to hit. They had been previously doing that for priority housing exemptions through Act 250, doing 20%, 80% AMI. So we felt that being an option, everyone would definitely just do that because it's a lot easier than doing, HUD fair market rent at 15%. So we felt that 20% was going to just be the only option anyone would do unless we made it 25 so that they could be a little bit more even. Because the hope is that the two options are sort of even so that some people will pick some will pick others. Because otherwise there's no point in having two options.
So I don't understand, I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand if right now we're getting 20% of the units at these thresholds.
Well, we're not
Why
anymore.
change? Oh, I thought you just said that the median rents are at 80% of market or something. Did I misunderstand what you said?
I thought you were talking about Act 250.
No, what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that right now developers are building units and 20% of them are, on average, are at these thresholds. And so I'm saying, well, if that's the case, why do we need this? Because I look globally at the housing stock and yeah, we need affordable units, but we also need market rate units and we need family size units, et cetera. So if we're getting 20% of the rents currently meeting these thresholds, why are we changing it? I just don't understand that.
In this case, we're looking more preventative, that there is a demand, there's a sustained demand in the county, in Winooski specifically, and this demand is not going to be sated in the next few years. So we're trying to address this affordability issue that could, or well, in this case, most probably would happen, as it has happened in other communities in Chittenden County, and trying to make sure that we have affordable units for the next 5 years. With regulations like this, this is only going to kick in, I don't know what the timeline is, but at least 6 months. Any development that comes after these regulations come into place, we're only going to see that development in 3-4 years possibly. So we need to keep in mind that in 3-4 years, there is going to be an increase in rent prices. So how do we make sure that there are affordable units in the community in the next 3, 4, 5 years? And this is one tool for doing that.
Mm-hmm. And it preserves them long term. So it's not just, maybe there are some affordable rents right now, although I think a lot of the rents that skew the average rent in Winooski lower are older units that are rented by people. For example, my apartment is pretty cheap, and I will stay in that apartment because it's a good deal. So people who are looking for apartments who maybe have more housing insecurity or are looking for one day to day, those units are going to be a lot more expensive generally than ones that you're seeing the median for. And then also, it's about preserving affordable units. It's not just, because if it's just a market rate unit, yes, maybe a developer is renting it closer to 100% AMI, but they could change that at any second, at any point, within a new lease. So the point of this is it preserves affordable units for many, many, many years in the future.
Yeah. So with that too, we're also trying to create a culture of inclusionary zoning too. That way we have an easy runway pretty much for developers because we have it priced at a rate that is affordable now, and we know that will be affordable in the coming years too.
But I think we should let you finish going through the changes and then we can.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Mike, and I think it is worthy of discussion. So I've made a note and we'll definitely move back to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Where was that? So inclusionary housing standards. We haven't made any changes to that since you last saw it in June. Income eligibility is the same. That's hasn't been changed since June. We already have those regulations in place under section 5.14 under priority housing. So additional considerations, So this is something that we added in so that way we allow for households to have more flexibility with units. So if a household, if there's an inclusionary unit that comes online, we don't want a household to be prevented from occupying that inclusionary unit because their household size doesn't match the unit size. So, and if it meets the household's needs, even if it might be smaller, then we should allow for that flexibility. I think it's more important to have to make sure that people have somewhere to live than having to have them wait longer for a unit to come online. So this section allows for that flexibility of occupying units based on household size. Duration of affordability, that hasn't changed since the last time. Perpetually, we're encouraging perpetual affordability with these regulations. Incentives, so this is the new part. And Jasmine and I have gotten back and forth about what levers can we pull to encourage more affordable units in Winooski and more housing development in Winooski. And in looking at the zoning regulations, to me, the levers that we have are building height and parking. So building height, this one might require a bit more conversations on whether this is actually feasible. I've had some conversations with our fire department about the feasibility of this and their capacity with this. The city is looking to have a new fire truck next year that would allow our fire department to reach 100 feet. So more buildings that are taller. But based on their staffing, that's something that we'll have to have more conversations about, whether it is feasible to have this in play, especially in the Gateway and the Central Business District that already allow for 5-story buildings right now. Another piece with the height is also the airport. So I've reached out to the airport to figure out whether topography maps, we usually have like a topo, and they say like buildings can't exceed this particular elevation at these particular locations. I haven't seen that topo yet, so that's something that I'll reach back to the airport about and try to get that topo to see whether this is possible and where this is possible, if it's even possible. Now, with the parking, so studies show that affordable housing generates less trips than market rate housing. So we know that there is going to be possibly less need for vehicles, and so we should unlock. And so I was thinking we should unlock that as an incentive for development, that they can take that cost and put it back into the building for more units or for making the units more feasible on a developer's end. And yeah, that's pretty much where the gist of it is. With this,
I was just gonna say, after you finish this, we can look, Revy made a chart with all of the incentives that I feel like is probably easier to implement this.
Yeah.
You didn't mention lot coverage as one of the incentives.
Yes. So the first part with the building height and with the parking, that's only in the Gateway, commercial, business, general commercial districts. So that would be in the corridors, just outside the downtown core, and then one other step just outside the downtown core where a lot of our commercial uses, larger commercial uses are currently. In the residential districts, the incentives are a little different. That if anyone exceeds or provides more affordable housing units, then they could get additional lot coverage, 15% or 25% depending on how much they provide. And then with that too, there would be a reduction in parking. Now with the reduction in parking, it is slightly different than in the commercial, general commercial and Gateway, because we can expect smaller scale development in the residential district. And there's going to be more availability of street parking in the residential districts if there's any overflow. And so the lot coverage, we can talk more about the incentives, but the idea is to make sure that going alongside any other priority housing incentives, that the lot coverage doesn't exceed 75%, just to maintain the scale and the character of the residential area as agreed upon probably by you and by council previously when you did look over the priority housing regulations.
I think, what is it now? if it's not 75%?
It's at, so the base is at 50 and for the residential district. And then with the priority housing incentives, a developer could get up to 75% already.
Lily, do you have a question? Sorry, I know you can see this.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like with developments, if we're like incentivizing if there's not a lot of parking, like with the most recent cuts to GMT and like the bus services, how do we anticipate like making sure that folks who might not have cars continue to have access to buses and public transportation? And like, how do we factor that in?
Yeah, so I've had conversations with GMT about this alongside a different set of regulations that the Planning Commission is working on with transportation demand management. So they will maintain the primary services in Winooski from my conversations with them. Of course, their whole situation is also very much in limbo, and depending on the year. But for now, their goal is to maintain service in Winooski because it provides regular service. There are a lot of customers on the routes that serve Winooski, and they know that it addresses an equity issue because there is a lot of affordable housing in Winooski. So that is a long-term goal.
Connor noted they are proposed cuts, so it's not.
Yeah.
It can be changed.
Yeah, it's something that they're gonna look into on a year-by-year basis, but their overall objective is to maintain service as much as possible in Winooski.
Do you mind if I just? Sure.
Yeah, please, Robert. We've
Um,
got one
yeah,
other question online, and then
Oh,
I
sorry.
think, sorry, before you ask your question, I think we'll take these two and then perhaps finish up with and get to the matrix it sounded like you had, and then we can do the discussion, but please, Robert. go ahead.
Yeah, sort of more, little comment, little context. With GMT, I just feel the need to jump in. This has kind of been like the ongoing chicken and egg discussion for the last 10 years. You know, we've talked about reducing parking minimums, and then we've had the debate of, well, you know, there isn't enough service, and now we're talking about cuts, so can we talk about reducing parking when they're talking about cuts? And, you know, it's, you know, at this point, I feel like we've reached a point where we just have to play with the levers that we have here and put pressure on the legislature around GMT. As somebody who was on the GMT board, yet another one of the many ridiculous volunteer things I've done over the years, you know, only about 10% of their budget comes from the local match, and 10%, at least when I was on the board, comes from the state, and 80% is federal funding. That federal funding is being, because the feds don't care about what they consider rural transportation. We don't think of it as rural, but the feds do. And it just doesn't have the bang for the buck that they want, so it's a consistent problem. So the state is where we really need to put pressure on the legislature to really back that, to make significant changes, because another problem with GMT is the way it's run as a member opt-in organization instead of being regionalized or even a state organization. So you end up with pieces like Colchester doesn't opt in, so it doesn't pay in, so that's that much more money that's not going in, and that's that fewer routes that aren't being funded because Colchester doesn't want any part of it. So I just, you know, when it comes to that, there's so many other things that we have to talk about beyond the parking minimums, but we gotta make, at some point, just do it. Yeah, so sorry, I just felt the need to jump in on the GMT piece because there's just so much context and things going on there. I had something else, but I forgot it, so.
Okay, Connor, and then,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very quickly, like to jump off of Robert's point, and thank you, Robert, for explaining that, because a lot of people don't know that, like, that formula. I also sit on GMT's Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Commission. We're actively working on like these cuts and like what the impact on the public is. In Winooski, ironically, 90% of people in Winooski live within like a quarter mile, which is the federal standard for walking distance. I don't agree with it. And 94% of BIPOC residents do. So we're being very mindful of it. And it, like Robert is absolutely right. It's a state issue and more so a federal issue. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Rev. If you want to continue, and then we're going to have a robust discussion.
Sure. Yeah, we're nearing the end, so it's great. So we have payment in lieu. So this was something that we discussed, I think, last time about including a payment in lieu and also making sure that we're setting it at an appropriate level, so we don't make it too hard and too high, and also we don't set it too low that everyone opts into the payment in lieu instead of building out the affordable housing units. In an early calculation of this in your memos, it's at 80,000, and I can explain that calculation after this too. Jasmine and I kind of looked at that calculation and looked at fair market rent and have had to adjust it. So that's something that we can also.
Oh, yeah, 65.
Yeah, so that's something we can discuss too. So yeah, I think we can go into further detail after this about the payment in lieu and how that works.
So it's 80 in this document, but you're
It's
saying
80 in this document, but yeah,
Working on it today,
we're working on it. Yeah, we were like looking at the numbers today and we're like, oh, okay, yeah. I'm like scratching my chest. And then with the payment in lieu also, in order to prevent developers from going into the payment in lieu constantly, that we wanted to set some bars on how much they could go into the payment in lieu and for what kinds of projects they could go into the payment in lieu for. So for projects proposing 20 units or more, only 50% of the required amount of units could be paid off through the payment in lieu. And for projects with less than 20 units, 20 dwelling units total, all the units could be paid off using the payment in lieu. So that way, for the larger projects, they would be required to build affordable housing. And for some of those smaller projects that might only require 1 unit or 2 units, where the numbers might not work out, that payment in lieu option is on the table for them. With any payment in lieu, of course, it would go into our housing trust fund that we could hope to provide back to the community members who are in need of that.
Yeah, and I came partially from Burlington because they lately have been seeing developers essentially either have, and granted they're very different and their program functions very differently than ours because they have so much more land available, but it's generally either like CHT or another nonprofit entity is developing like either a fully affordable building in coordination with a market building, or the developer's paying the full payment in lieu. They just received one for $500,000, which sounds great, but it's not housing, you know? So that's why we're trying to balance allowing for some flexibility for the developer, but since Winooski is small, we don't have that much land for developments. Our developments don't happen that frequently. We don't want everyone to pay out of it and end up with like a lot of money in our housing trust fund, which can be used, but not as impactfully as someone building an affordable unit. So the 50% cap is supposed to be kind of a guardrail to make sure that we're not just ending up with a bunch of money in the housing trust fund and no affordable units at the end of the day.
So application requirements, this just lays out all the documents that we need in order to determine whether an applicant is in compliance. The most important piece, at least for me reviewing application, is the draft legal documents, making sure that that's all that text is laid out and it meets our regulations. But everything else I will need to make sure that it meets our regulations. And then lastly, annual reporting to make sure that developments are in compliance, and Jasmine has that data, so that way we can monitor and evaluate over time, and if we need to adjust these regulations, then we can easily do that based on the data. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. And it sounded like there might be a
Yeah, we have
incentive
two,
matrix.
so there's
Is
the
that helpful?
affordability calculation and then the incentive document.
Yeah, we can
So-
talk about the incentives first.
Yeah.
Let's
sorry.
let's go ahead and do that, and then open it for some discussion. I've taken down some questions already. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
You looked quizzical for a second.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was nervous.
Just, ready for the questions.
Good, don't worry. No, look, the police are already on their way.
Yeah, so I've laid out here all of the incentives that are in the zoning regulations for priority housing projects. priority housing projects in our zoning are 3-bedroom units and affordable units that are priced at 100% AMI. And then below this in gray are the draft incentives under this inclusionary zoning draft text. So from the top down, you can see that we provide a number of incentives for eligible projects that have 3-bedroom units and or affordable units priced at 100% AMI. We provide parking reductions, additional lot coverage, the bonus floor, which is required by state statute, removal of permitting barriers for units that are for sale. And then on top of that, we have the draft incentives, which focus more on the reduction in parking requirements for affordable units.
Crazy.
Make people motion.
Sorry, I thought there was another page.
Yeah, and increased lot coverage. Yeah, parking reductions and increased lot coverage. So based on how these regulations are set up, these benefits can be stacked. So if there are projects that have 3+ bedrooms and also are affordable and meet our inclusionary zoning requirements, then they could be eligible for a range of incentives. It's kind of a strange pick and mix that we'll have to figure out some sort of checklist for applicants when they do come through to make sure that they have the right incentives or meet particular aspects of incentives.
It would be very rare for someone to be able to utilize all of them, because it would
Yes.
have to be like an entire development that is partially for sale, all 3+ bedroom, all affordable. So that's kind of like a unicorn development.
Yeah. Yes.
It'd be great if we saw many of those. but-
Yeah. I mean, even to have developments that might tap into both the priority housing and the inclusionary zoning, I feel will be rare just because of the priority housing requiring all the 3-bedroom units in a project that our inclusionary zoning would not off the bat. I think the parking reduction and the lot coverage are going to go hand in hand typically for projects, and even with lot coverage in the residential district, that caps out at 75%, and that's already written into the draft text and in the priority housing section of the ordinance. But yeah, that is on the team.
Yeah, so the colored sections are all incentives, and then technically the gray is offsets for inclusionary zoning,
Yeah.
because those are required by statute, so we have to, it's a give and take.
Yeah, and with the colors too, the colors are grouped based off of project types. So like the blue top part is all for a particular project that's planning and development with multi-family dwelling uses on a property with half of the units that are 3+ bedrooms. And then for particular projects that have all of 3+ bedrooms that are priced at 100% AMI, then they could get the additional lot coverage. And then the bonus story is an exception where a project that meets the state's definition of affordable housing, and they are eligible for the bonus story, and that can also be attached onto all these other potential incentives that are already in place for priority housing projects.
All right, excellent, thank you. So I think we're ready to dive into discussion. Before we do that, I would like to, let's frame this a little bit about process. So the purpose of the discussion here is to talk about what has been proposed with the expectation that this will be proposed to the city council. Is that, I'm actually looking to.
It'll probably take a little longer, but do you think it'll be amended?
I think it'll take another meeting just to figure out the building height at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, then I think next process would probably be, since the planning commission is here, for city council to review. Or, well, actually no, it would be public hearing first with planning commission, and then planning commission would take in comments for the public hearing, and then they would forward it to city council, public hearing, and they would take the comments. So it is a multi-step process, even within here. Yes.
Yeah. I think ideally, questions about more recent changes are helpful, rather than rehashing things we've discussed a few times. Of course, people still have big hesitations, and we can discuss them, but just since this is our third combined meeting talking about this, we can continue the momentum to.
Great. Yeah, I think, so I'd love to start off with Mike's question, which sort of, I think it frames it really well, is the why. Why are we doing this? And then we'll open it up to conversations about changes that have happened since the June meeting and move on from there. Does that sit well with everybody? I'm seeing some nods around the table, online some nods. Okay, great. So I think Mike brought up a good point. You know, if currently 20% of the rental units existing in the city are rented at 80% AMI, what is the benefit of this? And I think that question was, so I'll take a little bit of a prerogative here and put my thoughts out there. And just so folks know, my day job is actually working with the Vermont Department of Housing, and so this is not new to me. But I think Jasmine's point is, and Ravi's point is accurate, that this is really this is forward-looking. We're not applying this to anything that already exists. Right now, we have a market that is what it is. Thankfully, I would say, 20% of the units are renting at 80% AMI, but they are not required to do so. That is just a function of how we are. And as Jasmine mentioned, some of these units might be ready for upgrades and could quickly turn. I don't know how much the Planning Commission has spoken about, and at risk of opening up a huge can of worms that we definitely don't want to go into today, but
no, please don't.
Yeah. I know that there are potentially changes to the designated downtown areas and what's required in Act 181. So there is the potential for increased development in the area, assuming that people want to, developers want to take advantage of that. So I bring that up only to say that the goal here is to make sure that we, frankly, kind of maintain that market that we have right now, maybe improve it for affordable housing for sure, but at least be sure that we don't become a community of high-income condos, which is, potential. I think it's also important to bear in mind that this is an iterative process. These are not going to be carved into stone tablets. This is a process through which we go through to coax the development that will happen outside of municipal or even state control. So does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I understand, why we're doing it. My question is more about the percentage of units and why they are where they're at. I mean, I understand we're looking forward. We've got incentives out there for affordable housing. We've got exemptions. We've also got, as we discussed earlier, ways of getting out. And I know, I believe, Mr. Chair, that we're going to be talking about the payment in lieu formula at some point, which I think we need to talk about. I'm not sure that the percentages that were thrown out are necessarily appropriate. They may be. I'm just throwing it out there for discussion purposes, and I hope that, I know I talk a lot, but I hope that people, understand that I'm just one person, and I'm one vote on the Planning Commission, and people should feel free to express their opinions. I hope that not everyone agrees with me, because that's the best, I'd rather have several dissenting points of view or opposing points of view than everyone agreeing, because you don't get as good a discussion on that. So I welcome any conversation, anything that anyone has. I'd like to hear, and especially in the planning commission setting, we're open to whatever anyone has to say. Doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to agree with you, but we need to hear what people are thinking. So I just bring it up as, is 15% and 25%, are those the correct percentages? Do they make sense, or should they be the same? Should they be lower? Should they be, I wouldn't say higher, but maybe they need to be higher. I don't know. So that was my reason for bringing that up.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, this is a deliberative process, so happy to,
Connor, did you have something?
Connor, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna, I don't need to speak when I don't, like, have to, but like, no, I was just gonna reiterate Mike's point, so, thanks.
Okay.
What point?
Well, Mike is just not sure where 15 and 25% came for the inclusionary set-aside numbers. I would say from best practices, from other communities. It's generally always between 10 and 30%, nothing really outside of that. As I explained, 25% makes more sense for a higher income targeting, lower number for lower income targeting, because that is more rental loss for the developer. So therefore, by having them do less, it can be kind of an equal choice between the two. I think that will be discussed ideally at the developer roundtable that will hopefully be happening to make sure that is indeed true. But I'm not sure if anyone else has opinions about this. I feel that this is based on best practices and a lot of research that has been done by staff.
Yeah, pretty much just saying the same thing. Like it's based on best practices. For us, it is set a little bit higher just because of the Winooski context, because we're at that price point where most of the units that are coming online are at roughly 80%. So
well, not coming online, but
online already that are at 80%. So right now we're setting the bar at a point that could be something that developers can meet, and so we're establishing the culture of inclusionary zoning first, and with that too, we're providing continued affordability, looking prospectively.
And if I could jump, I know Connor's got if I could jump in just to provide a little, and forgive me if this is pedantic, because I know that you guys have been working on this for a long time, but just for context, median income for this area is approximately $70,000. So 80% of AMI is somebody making about $56,000 a year, and that translates to about $27 an hour, which in a lot of cases is still probably a pretty high wage. So we're not talking about folks who are on the brink of homelessness necessarily, but that's the target that we're looking at for this 20%, 25%.
Yeah, I will say this has happened several times when developers have come in to present to staff or talk about projects, and I think that the idea that developers have what affordable is generally like the voucher limit. So the 15% option that we have, which is still very important, but it's been frequent that developers have come in and we show them these are the rents that 80% AMI are, and they're like, oh, that's only like $20 a month less than what I had been planning to do. So I think that there's a conception that 80% is a lot higher than it actually is. So that being something that is probably not super difficult for a developer to achieve, we felt 25% made more sense rather than having it be lower.
And what's that translate to in rent? Like, we know how much a person would make in salary, but what's that?
80% for a 2-bedroom is like 2,000. It's probably like 1,700 for. It's not like it's not my room.
And the new units that are coming online, because it sounds like most of the ones that meet that threshold are probably older units. What's the average for a 2-bedroom coming online?
It's a little higher. For a 2-bedroom. I think it was around like 22. It's not super out of alignment. I wasn't able to analyze every single new market rate unit, but most of the big buildings like the City Gardens and City Lights and Halkeen and some of those, the market rate units for those. It's not super far from that. Granted, obviously some buildings are like luxury and you never know what they're planning on charging, but it's not, like 80% is not super low.
So even though we're like forward looking, this would definitely have like off the bat get more affordable housing than the market would naturally offer, because the new units are not being offered at the 80%.
No, and it preserves them. So we don't have to worry about like, are we going to lose those, because the housing that is being demolished to be redeveloped are going to be more likely to be affordable.
Yeah, and, excuse me, I do want to get to Connor's question, but Abby, to super rough estimates, I mean, normally quote unquote affordable, like the rule of thumb, to use that term, is 80 or 30% of a household income. So if it's a single family, a single person household rather, at that $56,000, we're talking about a rental rate of somewhere around $1,400, which I think is probably starting to become lower than what the true market will actually cover. I know for certain in the Old North End, where I came from after 12 years there, that used to be standard, and now you'd be lucky to get a $1,400 rental. And well, actually, you wouldn't be lucky because it would be a trashy place. So Connor, please.
Yeah, no, I can empathize with that as somebody who went from the Old North End of Burlington to Winooski. No, a question and a comment, because I am a white man. Question, that AMI number, is that per household or individual?
Household.
It's for households. Yeah, it's averaged on households. So.
Right. And then, nope, sorry, lost the comment. So never mind. Go ahead.
Jeez, we're sniping comments all over the place. Robert, did you remember what you were?
Oh, I did, but it doesn't matter. It's really not important. It's more about GMT. But I think Brendan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
Yeah, I think my question really for Remy and Jasmine is just, are you confident that setting this at 25% is not going to deter development too much? That I think that's my concern. I think that's Mike's concern, and I do believe at the last joint meeting this specific issue came up, and I think we're still where we were. So, which I think it's probably fine, but I think what I want is assurance that that particular issue has been looked at.
So up until now, we've had, for an exemption for Act 250, there's been an option that you can be exempt from that process if you do 20% of your units in your development at 80% AMI. And I think it was 9 out of the 10 developments in the past, since form-based code first started here, have chosen to do that. So it is very, very possible, because developers have done it. 9 developments have done it on a large scale, have done 20% of their units at 80% AMI. So yeah, so I feel it clearly is possible, because it has been happening over and over and over. And now they have that exemption now because of the Act 250 changes that have happened, but now they'll be offered other incentives or offsets through inclusionary zoning. So if anything, we will be further incentivizing them and through these offsets. So an extra 5% I don't think is going to take a project, but again, I think ideally we'll have a developer roundtable and can talk through it. So I think many other communities in the county have very similar inclusionary zoning regulations, and they are still seeing plenty of development. I think Winooski is one of the only urban places in Vermont, I think, that we do have high development potential and interest pretty regularly. So I feel confidently that it's not going to fully dissuade, but
yeah. Same.
All right. Mike has a question, and then asking our tech gentleman in the corner here, is this camera actually broadcasting on
On the Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we're just seeing what, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure, I mean, I
Oh, yeah,
love
we're
seeing
like right here.
Anna's face just big on our screen, but just wanted to
Yep, there we
Yeah.
are.
All right, beautiful. I mean, it's at least half of it. Mike, go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to comment, and I raised my hand before Jasmine finished her comments, but I guess I'm just, you know, if Act 250 allows 20%, an exemption for 20% affordable, and I think you said 90% of developers are meeting that, I'm not sure why we would go higher than that. I heard what you said after my thing, so I just throw it out there as a thought.
The recent regulatory changes to Act 250 have made that, they got rid of the priority housing exemption.
Right.
So that's no longer a tool that we have, which works out that we were already starting this process prior to that, because that would be pretty concerning to me if we no longer had that and also didn't have inclusionary. So it worked out timing wise, but that's no longer going to be an option for developers.
Right, I think what you're referring to, Mike, is the priority housing project exemptions, and those are now obsolete.
Okay, they may be obsolete, but they worked. So if we put it into our regulations,
Did they?
we're installing them back in Winooski.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's an accurate.
Oh, for inclusionary, yeah.
Yeah, that's an accurate
Mhm.
Yeah.
description. And yes, that's the nature of this discussion.
Robert?
I had
Thoughts?
thoughts and just a quick question on the Act 250 exemptions too. What was the duration on that as opposed to inclusionary?
It is, so the Act 250 exemptions, and forgive me if I just jump in
No,
here,
no, you're
because
good. Yeah.
I don't know if Ravi, have you delved into Act 181, or do you want me to?
A little bit. I mean, you probably dived into it way more than I have.
The short story is, it is limited to, I believe, 2 years, 3 years. But we'll see. I think it's a show and act sort of situation where I expect there will be very heavy discussions over what happens in the next 3 years, and it is not unreasonable to imagine that it, especially this administration, but perhaps future ones would push for it to be made permanent. But we basically have a 2 or 3 year trial run with the designated areas being exempt from Act 250, such that the municipality creates their own regulations, if any.
Sorry, I meant what was the duration for the exemptions? Sorry, for the.
Like how long did they have to rent the 20% at 80?
Yes, sorry, I'm
yes,
not
okay,
Is it
yeah.
20?
phrasing my question.
That I have.
Because
But-
we're talking about perpetuity, but.
Yeah, it was long-term. I will say that there was no auditing of that done, and I have received word that there was confirmed landlords in Burlington who were in fact not renting those 20% at 80% AMI, yet they did receive the exemption, just because there was no Act 250 person enforcing that. And even with a report, they just sent an affidavit for the landlord to sign. It is a landlord that also operates in Winooski, so I don't doubt that that is probably happening here.
Those units were term limited to 15 years.
Okay,
before
15. Okay.
Yeah.
So another reason I think that this will be great is that we actually have enforcement capabilities and power, and there will be auditing that is done using rent rolls, because that's unfortunate that that happens.
Good. I mean, that's why I wanted to ask the question, because it's great to look at this average is saying that currently a lot of these coming online we're at 80%, but if there's very little keeping them there, we could be looking at cliffs. It sounds like multiple cliffs, depending on. What I want to say about these numbers, I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I've been on this commission for 7 years, and we talk constantly about, we don't want to we don't want to hurt development, and I think I've said this in other meetings, nothing we've done has ever been shown. The only thing that seemed to hurt development is things far beyond our control, you know, the pandemic and things like that. Like, we're not going to break things by choosing 20% over 25% or 30% instead of 25%. And I think at a certain point we just have to pick numbers that have been well researched by staff and move forward, because as you pointed out, it's an iterative process. We can go through this, test the waters, and if the waters it's not working, we make changes. Just like with the Housing Trust Fund, we spent a lot of time building something, and then as soon as it was online, we realized, well, a lot of these pieces aren't actually seeming to help anybody. We need to have a conversation about, should we make changes? Should we have a interest buy down and things of that nature? Like, that's just the nature of this process. It's just a constant ongoing. And at a certain point, we have to pick numbers and move forward, or else we just keep coming back and spinning our wheels, and we're not helping anybody. So.
What Robert said.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that gets back to Brendan's point of, you know, are we hindering development is by putting we all, I think, have the shared goal of making sure that the community maintains some level of affordability, but are we cutting off our nose to spite our face when it comes to having development actually happen so that we can improve the housing stock? I share the thoughts. What I would propose right now is I want to open it up to anybody who hasn't spoken and invite them to speak, and then let's maybe take a straw poll on how people feel about the 25% and the 15% to propose, and then we can move on to parking, you know, to some of the other levers that have been identified. Is anybody opposed to that process?
So you're talking about just what's required, not the incentive portion. We'll talk about that next.
Correct.
Okay.
So, hearing...
I would just add quickly, I think, to the concerns about limiting future development. I agree that the worst thing we can do is prevent future growth, because we are in a housing crisis, and the only way to work ourselves out of that is by adding new housing. But at the same time, the type of units that are going to get built are those newer condos that are not as affordable unless we set in these clear requirements for permanent affordability. So that being the case, I just appreciate the staff work to come up with these numbers, and I think this is great.
I have a question about that part of the document, not those numbers in particular. I just wasn't fully following the household size explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind going over that one more time?
Sure. So typically with, I mean, you can probably talk about this more too, but like typically with placement with affordable housing units, there's a link between the size of the household and the size of the unit based on the bedroom count. So only a household with so many household members can occupy a particular unit based on the household size. So like I think with a household of two, you can only occupy like a one-bedroom apartment in certain places, certain instances. So the idea of that section was to unlock that whole tie between household size and unit size. So that way, there's a lot more flexibility on the units that a household can take, and that we wouldn't keep any households from waiting until a particular unit of a unit size came online in order for them to occupy it. So that way, households can have a bit more flexibility, a bit more choice in the units that they want to choose. And
Wait.
Yes.
Household size, you mean the number of people?
Number of people in a household.
So aren't there some, can't you overcrowd an apartment? Isn't there some numbers that you have to follow that you can't?
It's
And
pretty
what-
hard, though. I think our code allows for a lot more than an apartment generally.
But I
Legally
remember
secret
Dee
policy.
talking about this a few years ago.
Yeah.
That,
I remember her saying they have a really long wait list for a 3-bedroom, but can they put what a family that would ideally want to be in a 3-bedroom, can they put them in a 2-bedroom?
but
That's
somehow
the
that
question.
there's some language about that that doesn't allow to put too many people into an apartment.
Yeah, it's by square foot, and that's like that's on the code side of things.
And bedroom size too, though, right?
I think we do by square footage,
Like, you
which
can only
is
put
unique. It's normally by bedroom size, but even like ours is not that far off from that. For bedroom size, it's like 2 per bedroom and then 2 for living. It's a lot higher than most apartment buildings or building managers would ever allow someone to rent.
So Winooski can decide that that's not on another level, like the state or for overcrowding. You don't understand what I'm talking about.
The only,
I do, but that's more on the fire code side, so,
And I think our regulations are probably more stringent than the state ones.
yeah.
there are not any state regulations about the number of people in an apartment. Where it would come into play is if somebody had a voucher, then the
That's what I'm thinking.
then the feds
That's
get
what I'm thinking.
involved.
It was the
And-
voucher.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
do have,
Yeah.
an odd, I won't try to quote it now, but they have an odd calculation as to
Mhm.
how many people per room.
Yeah. So something we should be aware of in this conversation, or doesn't it affect us?
I think it's probably in 99.9% of the cases irrelevant to this discussion, would be my my professional opinion, not my personal opinion. Please.
If I'm understanding the language that you've crafted here, it's mostly just to make sure that we don't accidentally make it harder. You know, it's not really gonna do much else, you know, we don't wanna accidentally create a situation where we're limiting too much. So, you know, 2 brothers couldn't share a bedroom anymore because we've said it needs to be a certain size. And so it's,
Yeah,
we're
it's
not
very-
really
yeah.
adding any limits here or anything. We're trying to protect ourselves from accidentally making things harder for people.
Also,
That's all I read
since
this
this
as.
is going to be essentially a burden on the leasing agent or building managers, we don't wanna have it be too strict where they're not able to fill units or ends up being too restrictive and confusing. So there's a little bit of flexibility.
But why even have that section? Like, what's the problem that you're fixing by having that section?
I think the idea was that to, again, myself, like to just try to like allow for more housing choice in this option, just so that way people don't feel burdened to have to get a 3-bedroom if their household size requires them to get a 3-bedroom.
Because why would they feel like they'd have to, I guess is my question.
If the regulations said.
If the regulations say that they have to, or if because usually with affordable housing, there's a nexus between the household size and the amount of bedrooms, and that would determine whether they qualify or not to pay that amount of rent, typically. And that's where the HUD also comes into.
So it would only have to be in this regulation, that would be restricting that, and so we're kind of putting in language to say that there's no restriction, rather than just not putting restriction language in there. The only thing that I'm trying to avoid, because this is confusing, is having, like encouraging a 2-person, and being like, you can take a 3-bedroom, like we're not, we're encouraging whatever mix, and kind of like seeing that happen in the negative direction, not like a family occupying a smaller unit, but smaller single or 2 people occupying larger units.
Yeah, we did talk about the directionality, that as long as it's within code requirements, down is fine, but up is not necessarily what we want.
Right.
Yeah, because Deke, she's not here, but she runs Winooski Housing Authority, and she sees frequently like people that are eligible for 3 bedrooms that maybe are not the best. Like, it's not a family.
And that's
so,
happened at like the Butternut.
Yeah.
There's single people living in those 3-bedroom apartments. So I don't feel like the language is sort of getting at that.
Well, if I could, I want to be cognizant of what we as this commission can regulate. What we're trying to get at is developing units. How people utilize them on an individual basis is probably beyond the scope. We're always going to have, you know, the one person posted up in a 3-bedroom, or vice versa, the family who decides that they're going to take the 2.
So what's the point of the language then? Like, why even have the language in there?
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think that. I mean, personally, I don't know how other people feel, but I think that best practice would be for folks in our position to regulate the structure and not the families within them.
Yeah, that was my viewpoint too, was to allow for housing choice essentially. And that, I mean, I can't really regulate who lives in that unit, whether it's a 3-bedroom. I mean, by design, it's supposed to encourage families to live in them, but I can't really say like, oh, how many people are in your household? Okay, I will permit this. Or
But
like,
it sounded like you said other places were regulating housing size per
South
unit.
Burlington has this language.
South Burlington has this exact language. It's,
We could check, I mean, we could
yeah,
just
we
talk to
can
them
check
and
other,
clarify
yeah,
how they're going about it,
Yeah.
if we feel like that's necessary.
yeah.
Because it is confusing.
Yeah,
it is-
I read it multiple
yeah.
times and I was
Yeah,
like,
we
I don't
talked
know
through
what
this
to
last
say.
week.
Yeah.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Abby, but your point, I think, is just that we could just delete it.
Yeah,
Like, it would be
like,
the same-
and it would still be the same
thing,
exact
right?
thing.
So-
And it would be less confusing.
So I think that's the question,
Right.
is that right? Like,
Or is it
looking
some
at
other
that,
point
yeah.
you're trying to get to?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just second what she's saying. I find it quite confusing, just trying to understand where it actually applies.
Yeah, we can talk to Paul and then.
Yeah, I'll talk to Paul about it.
Okay, so we're gonna look into that, that language. Any other comments about the percentages or language that's in this portion, mostly looking to, not to call anyone out, well, I am. Patrice, anything?
No, I mean, just to go what Mike said, I mean, I think, is there like any suggestion, I mean, since Mike is having a little hard time with 15%, 25%, and is there like proposal of Mike, I mean, what would Mike want as an example? Does he want like 50% to be lower, 25 to be a little higher? Because, I think he's having a little hard time with it. I mean, and I think I'm confused as well. I don't know if Mike wants, I mean, would you guys take any proposal for Mike, if, as an example, if you propose like, can we go 10 and 30? Will that work? I know you guys did your research and stuff like that, but.
I think unless other people feel strongly that those are not the right numbers, that we should keep them what they are, because those have been researched and discussed multiple times.
Okay.
Yeah, I think anything else would not be recommended by staff.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, staff recommendation is for, as it stands. Sarah, I'm just trying to call out people who might not have weighed in, that's fine. Lily or Ruth, thoughts before we move on?
I guess the only thought I have just about the most recent comment is like, the way that I see the percentage of like, oh, if we're following Act 250 and it was 20%, like why aren't we following that? And my point of view is just like, we want to do better than what the government was proposing as their base amount and provide more affordable housing. And as Jasmine pointed out, like it hasn't deferred developers from continuing to develop in Winooski. And I think for like whatever future developers that are going to come into Winooski, like hopefully we draw the ones that are willing to have a percentage of their units be affordable, because it kind of just seems like that's a good thing to do.
Great, thank you for that, and it sounds like your kiddo agrees. I acknowledge Connor's raised his hand, but I did call Ruth out, so I want to give her a chance to weigh in if she'd like to. And if not,
She
that's
might
all
also be
right.
with baby.
Yeah, totally. All right, Connor, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna like endorse Lily's point. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Well, given that, would it make sense to have just I know that we're not gonna have a formal vote on this necessarily, but maybe a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. Is anybody really, who is supportive of the staff recommendation, having had this discussion, to go forward with proposing the 25% of inclusionary units at an affordability rate of 80% AMI with an alternative option of 15% of the units being available at 60% AMI, right? 65%
Well,
AMI.
60%, 65% income, so yes.
Yeah, sorry. The proposal that has been put on board, can we get a little, I'll ask for folks to put a thumbs up if they're okay with that being proposed. Thumbs up, guys, come on.
Thumbs up.
All right, and folks who are not okay with that, and that's okay,
I'm
it's.
just gonna abstain from it right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
it feels weird to vote on a piece,
Yeah, on a piece
of
of
it, because it's all
Okay.
so
No, that's
interrelated.
fine.
Yeah.
So maybe I should put it a different way. Are people feeling okay with the conversation that has happened and are willing to move on to other pieces? How about that? We're not voting on what's being proposed.
Yes, I would say.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, and sorry if I'm overly formalizing this. All right. Thank you all for that discussion. So, looking a bit to Revy and Jasmine, what are the other elements of changes in the plan that, or not necessarily actually looking at you guys, what are changes in the plan as proposed that folks want to talk about?
Probably incentives.
And, yeah, definitely incentives, but also you were going to discuss why you went from 80 to 65 as well.
For the
fee.
payment in lieu.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, payment
From
in lieu.
65
So,
to 80,
From
right?
80
Yeah.
to 65 is what it sounded like.
okay, Jasmine, if you want to pull up the Word doc.
Oh, yeah, I downloaded the new.
Yeah, because I need it. The Word doc that.
Did you change it since?
Yeah.
We don't have this, right? The doc's just gonna
No,
pull it.
because I had to change it again. Math.
It's a learning process.
Yeah. I have it open,
No.
so.
Sorry, it's the other one.
All right, guys, I think next time I need to bring my Labrador. He could just run around, circle around everyone and reset it.
Okay, so go down. Does it have the right numbers?
Yeah, the 1341 is right.
Yeah, so then go down further. Yes! I did the math right. I hope. So there are one of three ways that I looked up on best practices for calculating fee in lieu. Based on the data that we have easily available, this affordability gap calculation is, I think, what we can do, and possibly what we can adjust over time too as we monitor and evaluate. With this affordability gap method, it's the difference between the fair market price of the apartment with the price point for a low income or moderate income household can afford. So that price point right now is based on the data that Jasmine's collected. For a new studio, on average, last year it was $1,720.84 per month for rent. The HUD fair market rent for a studio is $1,348. And then that difference gets multiplied by 12 for the annual rent, and then divided by the capitalization rate. Now, this capitalization rate it's the net operating income over the current value of the unit. So how much a landlord is taken in over how much that unit is worth. And the capitalization rate, it ranges between 5% and 10%. The lower the percentage a particular market has indicates lower risk on the investment and a longer time to recoup the investment, and vice versa. So I mean, the 7% is an assumption right in the middle that investing in Winooski is kind of a medium risk, but there's a reward to that. Mike, if you have any more information about the cap rate, that would be very helpful based on your assessment work. So based on that assumption for the constant, this is the number that I got at $65,115.43. And so that would be per inclusionary unit. And you can see below, I mainly looked at how this compares to municipalities closer by, rather than looking broadly. I think looking more broadly nationally skews this number by a lot. In California, inclusionary housing is required statewide, and their fees in lieu can range between $100,000 and $150,000. So having that number out there really skews this number in our current
It looks like Portland's right up there with
context. Yes. Yeah.
So Burlington
yes.
and Williston are the only municipalities that are doing that around here?
Yes.
No. South
Well, so South Burlington does not do fee in lieu.
Okay.
Heinsberg does.
Heinsberg.
Heinsberg is the same as Williston. Heinsberg and Williston's regulations are really similar.
Yeah, I think so too.
And Williston's is per dwelling unit built, correct?
Checking the ticket.
So it looks like it's a lot less, but it's actually kind of the same as.
How many,
Yeah.
forgive my ignorance, but how many years has this in lieu, these programs been around, and are they successful? Do you have examples of that?
So Burlington's has been around for decades. Yeah, since the 90s. The fee in lieu, they actually had it at a higher level, around I want to say $50,000-$60,000 until they did an assessment in 2015 of the program, and they realized that fee in lieu was too high, so then they lowered it, and then now they're doing a reassessment of the program, and they're realizing that the fee in lieu is too low. So yeah, they're kind of in flux on figuring out where they should set that fee in lieu. Williston's, it's an inclusionary, it's a bonus, it's an affordable housing bonus program. So developers can opt in, they can pay the fee in lieu, or they can go through their normal growth management system process. They have a very unique permit processing. It's very unique for the state. So they provide, so by opting into inclusionary, they could get the incentive of lower permit barriers. But with the fee in lieu system, it's very unique for them.
So the Burlington, would we consider that's been successful?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
there's a lot of units that come online and maintained
Yeah.
online, but yeah.
I mean, and how much money have they actually raised, and what have they done with the money that they've raised? And I'm just trying to get an idea if this is a good idea.
Yeah, the payment in lieu is pretty common. It's essentially supposed to give developers flexibility so that it doesn't help or it doesn't continue to curb any sort of development, just because requiring things can have the potential to do that. I think initially we didn't have any payment in lieu option, but then we figured if we cap it at 50%, because my concern is just that developers were all going to pay it and we would end up with no affordable units, which is not like, why are we doing this if that's going to be the outcome? So I think having a cap can prevent that, and I think that's what Burlington, I don't know if they'll do a cap or they're just going to raise the payment in lieu number significantly enough that people stop using it, but at this point, like the last development paid $500,000 rather than doing inclusionary.
And that's just, again, sort of going back to what Abby was touching on is, do we create something that is going to get used, and why, if it doesn't feel like it's going to work here?
I think ideally payment in lieu programs are successful if it's used 50% of the time. I think is like the standard for like, you want some people to use it, but you don't want everyone to use it, because if everyone's using it, it's too low, and if no one's using it, it's too high.
Yeah, it's a weird situation where we actually don't want people to use it, but we want to offer it as an option.
Yeah.
If under extenuating circumstances they're not able to build those units, or just the numbers don't work out, then there's a release in a way that could be provided to the benefit of the city.
We're really looking at it as as a relief option, not as an
Mhm.
encouragement that we want anybody
Yeah.
to actually be doing it.
Yes.
No, because-
So are we saying that strongly enough in how it's being offered?
And 80 felt like too high, like that was asking too much.
Well, it just wasn't the math.
It just wasn't the math. The math shows it to be 65,000 instead of 80,000. So I think that if we're gonna offer this, then there should be some sort of
Yeah.
nexus connection to why we're offering this and why we're setting it at this rate.
Yeah.
If you see, I'm sorry, Brendan,
Go ahead.
my quick follow-up, but don't forget what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
If you see more than 50% utilizing this, then in theory, you go ahead and readjust it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what best practice is. I'm not as thrilled personally about any payment in lieu, just because I think our developments are so far and few between that if one development does payment in lieu, then and that's status of the person that technically administers the housing trust fund, that's, we could get, maybe, let's say $500,000 to the housing trust fund, that doesn't even buy a duplex, it's just so much less impactful than actually having affordable housing.
Similar
So,
concerns.
in my opinion, we want to dissuade it, but I do understand that in order to ensure that we're not fully curbing development, that it's nice to offer some flexibility, which is why we did the 50% cap, because it's kind of like a flexible, combination of the two. And then we had the threshold at 20 because infill development we want to encourage, and if it's a 20 unit development and someone has to build, 2 or what's the number, 2, 3, 4 units, I don't do math again. That could potentially sink that project. So when the scale is bigger, we're offering more, or we're asking them to contribute, but less than that, it's.
So do we have to offer it on a lower scale? Can we just offer it on higher scale projects?
That's what we have. What we want.
Yeah. So wait. So we offer it on a lower scale too.
Yeah.
So
Right?
Yeah, but
yeah.
there's no, on the 10 to 20, you don't have to save 50%. It's only over 20 that you would have to, you couldn't pay in lieu out of like 100%, like you could under the 10 to 20. That's the way I read it anyway.
Is it written only 20 and over for payment and everything else is required?
No.
Well, it's just 10 to 20 that we're talking about, because the whole threshold for ID is 10, so anything below 10 is a non.
Right, but you can pay, you get 100%, the way I read it, you can 100% pay in lieu if it's between 10 and 20.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And then after 20, 50% you cannot do pay in lieu.
Yes.
Could probably make a little table that.
Yes. Yeah. I like tables. I can do that.
I think that my question has been answered, but I guess, is it fair to say that one of the purposes of pay in lieu is to create a way, there might be some projects that could potentially be totally tanked because of you must build so many affordable units, and so to avoid that, this is an option that exists that we want to be calibrated, so we're not just always using it, but it's still.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, in this current market condition, I could foresee that with like a 20-unit development or a 25-unit development, that maybe like 5 years down the road, because of the numbers that they won't be able to fulfill putting in all those affordable units. So there has to be some way to offset that provides a benefit to the city directly, while also the project provides units for the city benefit too.
Pretty much that part.
I had a question. This is a singular payment, right? It's not a yearly payment or anything like that? Okay. Because I guess the multiply by 12 was basically saying the difference in 1 year. So they're basically paying what they would make in 1 year difference. Okay. Just to understand that.
Mike's raising his hand.
Mike, please.
Yeah, actually, on that last point, the capitalization rate, the overall capitalization rate actually extends that difference in rent into perpetuity. So that's more than just 1 year. 1 year is whatever that difference was, $5,000 or whatever. Do you understand that? Does that make sense?
7%.
Yeah.
Right.
I see.
Thank you, Mike.
So, yeah,
Thanks, Mike.
dividing by the percentage. Yeah.
Let me ask another question if I could.
Please.
Whoever's manning the board that I'm looking at here, if you could go up a little bit. I'm wondering, actually, that's good right there. I'm wondering, we were talking about in the last discussion, 80% and 65% of AMI. In this, we're using 60%. Is there a reason there's a difference? We're not using 65% of AMI?
The other one, we were saying 60, so it's HUD fair market rent, which is basically 60, but income qualification for those units is 65. So
Okay.
since it's rent and it's HUD fair market rent, that's basically 60% AMI. So that's what this number is here.
Okay.
If that
That
makes
explains
sense.
it. Thank you. Sorry for my confusion.
That's okay.
No, you're fine.
I had another question on this. By doing the payment in lieu, does it actually incentivize some units to actually be more expensive? So they say if you're doing the payment in lieu, you're making income off of that project. How are the developer's getting that from somewhere? Does that mean rent would be even more?
Yeah, they can charge whatever rent they want.
Yeah,
Or like
typically-
it's incentivizing more expensive units in some ways. Or no?
I would say it's actually de-incentivizing more because they have to pay for it. Usually it's in the design process that they're figuring out what their market rate or what their market's gonna be. This would be ensuring that at least the city gets some benefit, even if they say, I wanna build a 22 unit condo without any, without any affordability.
Well, they have to do
and
50%.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
so-
50%.
So they do have to do something.
Yeah.
They can't
Yeah,
do
doing
nothing.
something in their
But
pro
the
forma.
payment is, they're buying their way out of an affordability covenant, that's essentially
Yeah.
what's happening.
But they're getting that money from higher
From the
rents,
rent that they will-
basically.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
incentivizing
Mhm.
certain higher rents
Yeah.
at times, potentially, or no?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
It could-
potentially.
that could be the
Yeah.
argument that, yeah.
No, that's fair, that's fair.
Well, that's what you want.
So it
High
creates a spread,
Mhm,
potentially.
yeah, which realistically we do want economic integration in the
Okay.
city and neighborhoods and buildings. It's better than having, for example, we have a lot of concentrated poverty in some areas of the city where it's all subsidized housing. So it's all like project-based housing, for example. We have some buildings that are completely all market rate and they're all beautiful. And the point of inclusionary zoning is that it's inclusionary. So all of the buildings that are built will have, there probably will be some higher expensive units that, someone will pay for, some ideally in the middle, and then if we are able to pass this, there will be a chunk that will be affordable and affordable in perpetuity.
I see. I'm more just at the payment in lieu part, I guess,
Mhm.
is that specifically having that potentially encourages even higher, which is fine, you're saying we want the spread,
Yeah.
but
We can
just
ask,
as a thing.
yeah, we can ask if we're able to set up the, and everyone agrees, the developer roundtable, then that's definitely a question we can ask. Because I know at least one of the developers being invited has done the full payment in lieu before. So
And
that's
where-
definitely a good question.
Where do they pull that money from, basically,
Yeah.
to make that?
Their money that they have.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so Jack, as a note keeper, can you make sure that question is
Absolutely.
memorialized for the developer roundtable? Thank
Yep.
you.
Is the developer roundtable open to everyone?
Yeah, well, it'll be, a couple of meetings.
So it'll be-
Okay. Payment in lieu, other questions about that?
If not, we can move to incentives. probably.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock. We've got about 20 minutes left on our schedule.
I only need like 3 for the developer
And
roundtable.
crush it. Oh, okay. All right, so we'll save that for the end. So let's all right, let's move on to discussion of what's next part. Are we talking about parking incentives? What's the next
Just incentives generally.
Incentives generally. Discussion that we have not, burning questions that people have about other incentives on this proposal. Please.
Yeah, we can just, sure, I'll jump in. I was kind of looking through, because I do think we spend a lot of time on the incentives that are currently in code, so I was trying to see like how they function and interact with one another, and sort of like how we're dealing with our 3 housing priorities: 3+ bedroom, affordable, and home ownership. And I want to make sure that we're really thoughtful about whatever incentives that we're adding that aren't deprioritizing the incentives that are already in code. So for example, in the way that it's currently written, you can do one more in a 20-unit project, you can do one more affordable unit and get the same lot coverage bonus that you would get if you were doing 50% 3+ bedroom units. So you're talking about 10 3+ bedroom units added to the market, or one more affordable unit in the same lot coverage incentive. It seems like a little bit of a mismatch that we just want to make sure we're not cannibalizing our other housing priorities by having the incentives for this too low. And then when you add them all up, we have 8, when you're talking about, again, the 3 housing priorities, we've got 8 incentives that deal with 3+ bedroom, we have 2 that deal with home ownership, and now we have 12 that deal with affordable housing. So those are 2 different things, but I'm hoping
Yeah, I
we can
would say
discuss
these
them.
are not, well, yeah, these are offsets technically. So they're not like a traditional incentive, but do you know what she's referring to with the, which incentive are you saying?
Like for my example?
Yeah.
So if you go to, so all of the things not in gray are like existing incentives that we put in place to get at these 3 sort of housing priorities. And the one that we deal with lot coverage, right? We're asking for developers to get that 15% increase in lot coverage. We're asking developers to do 50% of their units in 3+ bedrooms. So with that 15% lot coverage, we're getting 10, if we're talking about a 20-unit development, we're getting 10 3+ bedrooms coming online in the city. But the way that you've written the affordability incentive, all they have to do is add 1 more unit in that 20 unit, so 6 instead of the required 5, and they get that same bonus of the lot coverage. You're asking them to do way less and giving them the same thing, which I think if I was a developer, I would just always, like, never do the 3+ bedroom one. So just sort of like looking at, I think it's important that we're looking at the incentives and making sure we're not cannibalizing the existing
The
ones.
scaling of it, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that might be a good question for a developer, because in a residential area, I feel like the 3+ bedrooms are going to be easier to build than in like a big high-rise building, and the affordability impacts in perpetuity. And so that might eat into costs a lot more than the 3+ bedroom. So people might prefer to do the 3+ bedroom, but again, that's maybe a question that a developer would answer.
Yeah, because you have the 15% in residential. It's not in the gateway, so you're not looking at the huge development. You're just saying 1 more. Yeah.
Good catch. Thanks, Abby.
Sorry, I can't list all of these at the same time.
Other thoughts? Anybody online? No hands up? Okay, just want to be careful about that. Okay.
I have
Please, no,
I can
go
keep
ahead.
going.
It's all right.
I was looking, so we have, although they're not related to housing priorities, we have bonus story provisions, incentives written into the code. Actually, I shouldn't say one is related to affordable housing, but one is related to soundproofing. And then we have like 3 or 4 different things written in code that you get the bonus story. So I was just wondering how this bonus story interacts with those other bonus stories. Like, could they do soundproofing, affordable housing, and underground parking, and like, yeah, how do those play together? And how tall we end up, like, with our buildings.
You're talking about the green, this one?
No.
This one already.
No.
She's talking about the underground parking with the parking incentive, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. We have lots of incentives that exist that deal with increase in building bonus stories, basically. So I was wondering how what you are proposing plays with those other incentives.
Right, and I think for this one, I capped it at 85 feet in the text.
That's like an 8-story building.
No, it would be 6.5.
6.5-story building.
Yeah, so so that way, that would be the cap on that.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I guess you said you were gonna follow up, the airport's the
Yeah.
only potential
Yeah,
issue with
just-
that, because our
yeah.
fire, we're set up for fire. for
Yeah,
that season.
yeah, just for fire, it depends on the context. That it just depends on the setbacks, whether, depending on the setbacks, would determine whether they can access the roof or not. And then of course, capacity of our fire department for adequate fire suppression.
But you're having those conversations.
Yeah, but from at this point, like, it seems like at 6.5 is probably.
What's the highest building in Winooski now?
It's gonna be in the downtown core. Yeah. Is it
Maybe
gonna
it'll be the new Whiskey Falls East
The hotel?
potentially? I think no, it won't be, because the highest is gonna be it's gonna be either Spinner or a Key. Yeah. And I think that one's. I think when I looked at the elevation, it looked like that was capped at like 80 or 85 feet.
So really, we're
Right,
talking in line with what, in terms of size, what we typically have in Winooski already.
Yes.
And it's really just
Yes.
ensuring that it doesn't interact with the annoying airport that keeps interrupting our meeting.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
We want those F-35s to get.
Yeah, and I think, and then on top of that, the feasibility of it is gonna be different as you go towards the school.
Yeah.
So.
I'm only bringing it up because I would be prepared for some pushback from the community if we start saying we want to make buildings higher. And we should think about that, just because that's going to trigger, I think, it could trigger things for people.
Yeah.
Mike has a question.
Mike, please.
No, I just wanted to clarify, when the downtown was redeveloped, the height limit was set at the height of the Winooski block. So the Spinner Place couldn't be any higher than the height of the Winooski block?
Out of curiosity, was that on?
What's that?
Well, out of curiosity, was that on a site basis from ground, or was that just the tallest building in the block?
The maximum height that building could be was equal to the height of the Winooski block.
Understood.
I
Thank you.
believe that was part of the Act 250 approvals. And it was to try to protect the Winooski block aesthetic, if you will.
So Mike, that sort of master plan language is what you're,
Yes.
Connor has it.
Connor,
No, I can't see that.
please. Yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping.
Oh, yeah.
on the screen.
Sorry.
You're good.
As we're on the topic, like, what was the standard for the height of the Winooski block? Because it could be higher. Everything else could be higher.
The Winooski block was built in, 1860, so I don't know as there was any requirement back then. But as I say, that was, when the downtown was redeveloped, that was identified as the focal point, if you will. And so they used that as the maximum height for Spinner Place because, as I said, they wanted to ensure that
To keep that kind of
Winooski
scale.
blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scale, and also there's something about protecting the view of the Winooski block as you come from Burlington. Of course, they do it with the traffic circle, but yeah.
So
All right.
in the
Thank you.
downtown block, it's got a step increase. So the areas closest to the street have a height limit of 70 feet, and then there's a step increase for the center of Spinner Place and the center of Kings Crossing. And depending on East Allen or Winooski Falls Way, it varies between, let's see, what is that, 70 to 100 feet.
Yeah, it's a big difference in elevation from the top of the circle to the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spinner appears to be 5 at the top and 6 or even 6.5 at the bottom of the circle.
Yeah, and I think this is consistent with, at some point months ago, we were talking about this. In downtown, our allowed building height is actually, I think, a little higher than we might think, but that's not like up towards the school, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, Sarah. No, I think it's a lot lower there.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind.
And I have, I think we need, since these parking incentives are being introduced in here, we should talk about whether we're rounding up or down on, because it's 0.5, 0.75. So often you're going to end up in situations where it's like, instead of 9 parking spots, you need 4.5. So just having clarity whether.
When I read it earlier today, I was thinking back to our last planning commission meeting and thinking I needed to add rounding language in there. So then I like plugged it in and put like round to the nearest hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the point about the GMT conversation, I think Winooski should be a proactive role. It sounds like South Burlington, Williston, and Shelburne are all reimagining what their routes look like and proposing the new routes to GMT. And Winooski, they've asked Winooski to do the same, and we haven't taken them up on it.
I talked to Chris Damiani last week and told him about like routes that we prefer to see.
Are we going to reimagine our routes? Is that going to be like a community conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I'll follow up with him about this too. They reached out to you about this? Or?
Yeah, I've talked to Locomotion, I've talked to Chris and other municipalities who are doing it, and they're like, why isn't Winooski doing this? You have such a large bus ridership population. And I feel like we're often, I know the parking question is really sensitive, but I'd love to be offering more robust options if we're taking away.
Chris and I did a good brainstorming about it. So.
And I think the community would be very actively interested in that conversation.
I completely agree with that. Thank you for bringing that up, Abby.
Other thoughts about incentives?
Because we're really just looking at these.
Right.
Can't help but scroll.
All right, I'm feeling like.
Can I ask a quick question? So these incentives, is this something that is going to be discussed with the developer roundtable specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's because I want to hear what their thoughts are and how we can create an incentive program that really fits their needs more than anything else.
So it sounds like we've got some good notes on these. We've flagged some questions and maybe some loopholes that need cinching with incentives. Does it make sense now to talk quickly about the developer roundtable where this is going to be reintroduced and discussed?
Yeah.
Are folks feeling okay with moving on to that? All right. Jasmine.
Sorry, let me find. I have a whole list.
And Thomas, you have a killer profile picture. I mean, that's
Thank you very much. It was taken probably more years ago than I should still be using it, but it was at a friend's wedding, so I figure I don't always look that good. I may as well throw it up for meetings.
If I bump into you and you're not in a tuxedo, I'm gonna be really upset.
I'm gonna have to really dress up for the next council meeting.
Put the picture back up, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Wait, sorry. I don't want to derail this, but like, is that not technically catfishing, Thomas?
Yeah, no, sure, in a way.
Okay. So I think initially it's been brought up, I think by council, I know at least by the mayor has discussed the fact that besides being good practice, that it would be productive and helpful prior to passing inclusionary zoning and, well, we'll probably mostly talk about inclusionary regulations, that it would be good to talk to some of our local developers to make sure that the regulations are, in alignment with what is possible for them. I will say I have spoken to quite a few about it a few months ago, and you should expect some pushback just generally because It makes sense that people don't like to be regulated if they're not currently being regulated. That's just
especially if it costs them money or
how
makes
the
them
world
do
works.
something they wouldn't normally do.
Regardless of if they're able, they're still able to develop in places that have inclusionary. So I just wanted to say that, keep it in mind. But I know that we do have some developers that have been really helpful in talking about incentives and research and kind of looking through their pro formas. So we were thinking that it might make sense to do 1 month apart again, and then potentially have the November meeting be a developer roundtable kind of event.
Because you feel like you haven't gathered what you needed from developers through your one-on-ones?
That was not specific. That was more about developer costs rather than like actual incentives. I think and we actually didn't have like the incentives built out or anything. It was more just like, we're doing this, and there was like, well, I can do that.
Right.
And
they'll be like, give
it's
me
not
more,
surprising, yeah.
give me more. These incentives aren't
As
good
long as they
enough.
don't come and say, I don't have to develop in Winooski, which developers have said to us.
Yeah. And people are gonna, stand up for what they're gonna protect their interests.
Right.
So we were potentially thinking the November meeting, and we were looking at Tuesday, November 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. So the week before Thanksgiving things start. And then potentially a backup date for November 20th, so the next day, Wednesday, just in case like most of the developers can't come, and obviously we don't want to have no one come. So I don't know. That's kind of a similar path of the combined meetings that we've been doing on Tuesdays. So I don't know if folks want to take a look at that. Let me know. You can let me know after the meeting or email me if that doesn't work for you. We can talk about another time potentially. And then the content. So obviously we've referenced this a couple of times. But it's essentially just to include developer feedback relating to IZ before it goes to council. So feasibility of the regulations, financial impact of the regulations, and effectiveness of the IZ offsets. So just making sure that they're feasible, or they are what a developer would like to see in terms of an offset. IZ is kind of a trade situation where we're asking developers to develop for public good. So it's, we have to provide them with something legally. And then you had mentioned TDM.
Yes. So,
I just said as well.
oh yes, yeah. So Planning Commission is right now working on the more robust transportation demand management regulations to push larger developments to look at ways to reduce their vehicle miles traveled and to have residents, future residents, future employees to not use their car. So walk, bike, use transit potentially, and providing some sort of offset and incentive program for that. So hopefully by mid-November we'll have a workable draft that we can share with developers and get their feedback on how well this would work and how well this could be built into their future developments.
Yeah, so maybe it'll be like a 3-hour, but we'll get snacks or food or something, just because I don't want us to feel super rushed. But Rebby was saying that he thought that it would be helpful to have a developer roundtable for that topic as well. So we were thinking maybe we could do just a full roundtable and discuss both topic items. And then I'll go through, so this is the list of people we have brainstormed that we were going to invite. So far, Eric Farrell, Phil Niquette, Doug Nettie, Michael Monty from CHT, potentially someone from Habitat for Humanity, Gabe Handy, Joe Handy, since he recently purchased a few parcels, someone from Summit, Nate DeJess, Eric Hoekstra, David Tien, and then I have Jeff Myers. I have to figure out if he develops those buildings or if he just manages them. So whoever develops those 2 buildings on Main Street. Mike might know.
I think Mike Crete and Jeff Myers, I think.
Okay,
I think they work together. I think they still
Okay.
do.
great. So I don't know if anyone, I think that's pretty exhaustive, but,
That's pretty solid for this region.
okay.
I can help you find somebody at Summit.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I know, I think Nate partners with them, so he actually might just help me connect as well. But yes, so that's the idea, to talk through this, kind of get ahead of any hesitations or concerns before it goes to council. So we can talk through if there are ideas brought up that we want to change, or if we don't feel like there are concerns that we want to address. It gives us time rather than having that all come to a head like at council. Yeah. Anyone? Yeah.
Sorry, not on that, but I was just, in addition to those folks, talked to Mike about, Michael Monti.
Yeah.
Too many Mikes.
I thought you were talking about me.
No. We got enough of you.
Shut up.
I'm kidding. I talked to Michael Monti about some of the partners that CHC works with, and whether some of the more on-the-ground builder folks
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll ask Mike.
I can't think of
Like
anyone off the top of
Evernorth
my head
or-
right now,
yeah.
but he will.
I don't know how many, I was trying to think of like developers who have developed in Winooski.
Do you have WHA in the list?
WHA.
The Winooski Housing Authority
Deke will be here, but,
has the WHA.
as the housing commission, but I can invite her in for professional capacity.
Has our local housing authority. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
And Paul Keen
Hey,
doesn't
Jasmine.
develop here anymore, do they? Paul Keen doesn't develop here anymore, do they?
I mean, they haven't, but that doesn't mean you can't.
Jasmine?
Yeah.
So, I believe, and someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, the RPCs were charged with doing housing, what is it?
Targets.
Targets.
Yes.
I'm not sure, I should know, but I don't think they've been developed yet. But at some future meeting, would that be good to have Charlie Baker or Taylor from RPC come in and discuss those with us jointly?
I think Rebby's on the task force. Okay.
Yeah, I've participated on task force stuff. They had draft numbers presented during the August Planning Advisory Committee meeting. They're still refining them. I expect to see them in October. They didn't meet in September. So yeah, I can, once they have the numbers down, then we can invite someone from the land use side or Charlie Baker to a joint meeting potentially.
Actually, they have the quarterly housing convening meeting on Monday night, so
Yeah.
I can let you know if they bring it up. But
Mhm.
you would probably know it.
Yeah, I know that the RPC board hasn't seen those yet, so that's why I wasn't sure. Okay.
They are getting close to, it's associated with the statewide housing needs assessment, and they're getting pretty close to publicizing those. It's a good point.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any final thoughts? All right. Well, thanks everybody for spending your evening with us, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
All right. Jack's got the motion. We've got a second from Robert, and any opposed to adjournment?
Before we close, can I just invite anyone from the Housing Commission that wants to come and sit in on our Planning Commission meetings? You're always more than welcome.
Why do I get the sneaking suspicion you're talking to me? Thank you for that invitation, and yeah, we'll see.
Likewise.
See what we can do. Yeah. Similarly, Planning Commission, please feel free to come to the Housing Commission. Thank you all. With that, let's part ways. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Rec-